The mixing bowl slipped from my trembling hands, clattering against the marble countertop of Proserpio Ferri's pristine kitchen. The sound echoed through the silence like a gunshot, and I froze, waiting for footsteps that never came. 12:23 a.m., and here I was again, alone with my tears and the endless stack of dishes from another evening I'd served, but never shared. The penthouse kitchen gleamed under soft blue LED strips, all clean lines and expensive surfaces that reflected the Manhattan skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Earlier tonight, this space had hummed with controlled chaos. Proserpio's associates had filled the dining room, their voices low and careful, discussing business I pretended not to understand. Money laundering, territory disputes, things that existed in a world where a wrong word could end a life. I worked the sponge in slow circles around the bowl's rim, watching soap bubbles catch the ambient light. The head of household staff had been clear. Night kitchen work stays invisible. If you must clean after hours, keep noise to minimum. Mr. Ferri values his peace, as if I were somehow separate from his organization, a shadow who cooked and cleaned and disappeared before he noticed my existence. My shoulders burned. They always did by this time of night. The dinner service had required preparing course after course for 12 men who ate in silence, each dish a test of my culinary training. My hands had shaken while plating the final dessert, but I'd kept my movements precise, my face neutral. Show weakness in a place like this, and you'd vanish before dawn. Not just fired, vanished. The water had gone cold, so I drained the sink and refilled it, adding more soap. The scent of industrial degreaser filled my nostrils, sharp and chemical. Nothing like the herbs I'd once grown in my father's garden. It reminded me of the cramped studio apartment I'd fled 3 months ago, the one I could no longer afford after the funeral expenses drained everything. At least here I had shelter, even if that shelter came with the constant weight of watching eyes. A wine glass nearly slipped from my fingers. I lunged for it, catching the delicate stem before it could shatter against the sink's edge. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clutched the crystal, imagining the sound of breaking glass echoing through Proserpio's domain. That would have been the end of everything. One mistake, one moment of clumsiness, and I'd be another problem that needed solving. Careful, I whispered to myself, setting the glass gently on the drying rack. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window, hollow-eyed, hair escaping its neat bun, skin pale from too many sleepless nights. I looked away quickly. There was nothing to be gained from dwelling on how far I'd fallen, how the girl who'd once dreamed of opening her own restaurant had become this, a ghost who cooked for criminals while her father's secrets rotted in his grave. I reached for another plate when I heard it. A footstep. My hands froze in the water, soap suds dripping from my fingers. The sound had come from the hallway that led to Proserpio's private wing. I held my breath, listening, praying I'd imagined it. Another footstep, closer now. Panic seized me. I wasn't supposed to be here, or rather, I was supposed to be here, but I wasn't supposed to be seen. The rules were absolute. Kitchen staff worked in shadows, finished before dawn, vanished before the boss stirred. Being discovered like this, in my simple black dress with tears still wet on my cheeks, was a violation of the invisible contract that kept me breathing. I considered running, but there was nowhere to go. The kitchen had only 2 exits, the hallway where the footsteps approached and the service elevator across the room. I'd never make it without being seen, so I did the only thing I could. I kept washing dishes, trying to make myself small and unobtrusive, hoping whoever it was would take what they needed and leave without really noticing me. The footsteps stopped. I could feel eyes on me, a weight pressing against my shoulder blades like the barrel of a gun. My hands moved mechanically through the water, lifting a plate, scrubbing it, rinsing it, setting it aside. Act normal, I told myself. Act like you belong here. You're the new cook. The voice was male, low and smooth with an edge of something I couldn't identify. Not curiosity, not annoyance. Something darker, more calculating. I turned slowly, keeping my eyes lowered. "Yes, sir. I apologize if I disturbed you. I was just finishing up. Look at me." It wasn't a request. I raised my eyes and immediately understood why the other staff avoided Proserpio Ferri at all costs. He stood in the doorway, tall, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. He wore black slacks and a white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with scars that told stories I didn't want to know. But it was his eyes that held me frozen, dark, intense, calculating, the kind of eyes that saw everything, that peeled back layers you didn't even know you had. "What's your name?" he asked, moving further into the kitchen. Each step was deliberate, predatory. "Vera, sir." My voice came out barely above a whisper. "Vera Gebhart." He moved closer to the island where I stood, and I caught his scent. Expensive cologne mixed with whiskey and something metallic that made every instinct scream danger. "Vera," he repeated, testing how my name felt in his mouth. "How long have you been working here?" 3 months, sir." "And you do this every night? Wash dishes at 12:23 in the morning?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Up close, he was devastatingly handsome, in a way that felt almost cruel. Sharp jawline, full lips that looked like they rarely smiled, and those eyes that seemed to be cataloging every detail about me. "Why?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "Sir? Why are you washing dishes at 12:23 in the morning? The dinner service ended at 10. These should have been done hours ago." I felt heat creep up my neck. "There was a lot to clean, sir. The dinner was larger than expected, and I wanted to make sure everything was perfect." He was close enough now that I could see a thin scar running along his jaw, a signet ring on his right hand, the way his shirt stretched across shoulders that suggested carefully contained strength. "You're lying." My breath caught. "I'm not." "You are." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "I know exactly how long it takes to clean up after dinner service. You're doing someone else's work." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I wanted to deny it, but something in his expression told me that would be pointless. He already knew. "The evening shift cook called in sick," I heard myself say. "I offered to cover her duties." "Cover?" he repeated, his tone suggesting he knew that wasn't the whole truth. "And what did you get in exchange for this generosity?" Nothing. I'd gotten nothing except the knowledge that I'd bought myself a little more security, a little more time before I could be dismissed for being unnecessary. But I couldn't say that. Couldn't admit that I was so desperate to keep this job that I'd work myself to exhaustion every night if it meant staying alive. "It was the right thing to do," I said instead. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. He pushed off the counter and moved closer. Close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "The right thing to do," he murmured, and there was something almost mocking in his tone. "You're either incredibly naive or incredibly stupid." I should have kept quiet, should have nodded and apologized and hoped he'd leave. But exhaustion had frayed my usual careful control, and I heard myself respond, "Maybe I'm just trying to survive, sir." His dark eyes studied my face for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or calculation. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more dangerous. "Something about you doesn't belong here, Vera Gebhart." He stepped back, but his gaze never left mine. "If you ever lie to me again, I'll know." The threat hung in the air between us as he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my trembling hands and the terrible certainty that I'd just made a mistake that could cost me everything. Before we go deeper into this dangerous night, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from right now. Proserpio's office occupied the entire 42nd floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Manhattan's glittering skyline. At 7 a.m., the city pulsed with morning energy below, but up here, silence reigned except for the soft click of fingers on a keyboard. Marcus Chen, his head of security, sat across from the mahogany desk with a tablet in his hands and concern etched across his weathered features. 20 years of military service followed by 15 years protecting the Ferri family had taught him to recognize when something didn't add up. "Her file is too clean," Marcus said, scrolling through the digital documents. Vera Gebhart, 26, graduated from the Culinary Institute with honors. Previous employment at 3 high-end restaurants in Chicago. References check out, background screening passed, no criminal record. Proserpio leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled as he stared out at the city. He'd barely slept after the kitchen encounter, her words echoing in his mind. Maybe I'm just trying to survive. There had been something in her voice, a desperation that went deeper than simple employment anxiety. "What makes it too clean?" he asked. "The gaps," Marcus replied, highlighting sections on the screen. 3 months between her last restaurant job and applying here. No explanation for the employment break. Her references are solid, but they're all from supervisors who've since left their positions. And her emergency contact is listed as none. No family. That's what bothers me. Everyone has someone. Parents, siblings, cousins. But Vera Gebhart appears to have materialized out of thin air 3 months ago. Proserpio turned from the window, his dark eyes focusing on the tablet. "Show me her application again." Marcus swiped to the employment form, and there it was, the signature that had been nagging at Proserpio since their encounter. Vera Gebhart. The surname rolled around in his mind like a marble in a glass bowl, familiar but elusive. "Gebhart," he murmured aloud. "German origin? Could be, or Austrian. It's not uncommon, but—" Marcus paused, his expression shifting. "Boss, you recognize that name, don't you?" Proserpio's jaw tightened. He did recognize it, but the memory was buried under years of other business, other betrayals, other bodies. Run a deeper search. Go back 10 years. Cross-reference with any Gebhart who had dealings with our organization or our competitors. "Already started," Marcus said, his fingers flying across the tablet. "Should have results within the hour." "And increase surveillance on her. I want to know where she goes, who she talks to, what she does during her off hours." "You think she's a plant?" Proserpio stood and walked to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the morning sky. "I think someone wanted her close to me. The question is why." 15 years earlier. The warehouse in Queens had reeked of motor oil and fear. Proserpio, barely 21 and still learning the weight of his father's legacy, had stood beside the older man as they confronted the accountant who'd been skimming from their operations. Matthias Gebhart had been a thin, nervous man with wire-rimmed glasses and hands that shook when he spoke. He'd worked for the Ferri organization for 3 years, managing their legitimate business fronts with meticulous precision. Too meticulous, as it turned out. "Please," Matthias had begged, his accent thick with desperation. "I have a daughter. She's only 11. She doesn't know anything about this." Proserpio's father, Vincent Ferri, had been unmoved. "You should have thought about your daughter before you stole from us, Matthias." The man had stolen more than money. He'd copied financial records, transaction logs, details that could have brought down 3 families if they'd fallen into the wrong hands. But Matthias hadn't sold the information. He'd simply vanished one night, taking his daughter and disappearing into the vast anonymity of America. They'd found his body 2 weeks later in a Chicago motel room. Apparent suicide, the police had ruled. A single gunshot to the head, a note confessing to embezzlement, and no sign of the stolen files or the 11-year-old girl. The memory crystallized as Marcus's tablet chimed with incoming data. Got it, Marcus said, his voice tight. Vera Gebhart, deceased 15 years ago, former accountant for Ferri Enterprises, suspected of embezzling $2.3 million and copying sensitive financial records. His daughter? Vera Gebhart, age 11 at the time of his death, placed in foster care in Chicago after his suicide, multiple placements, aged out of the system at 18. Marcus looked up from the screen. Boss, if she's his daughter... Someone wants her close to me, Proserpio finished. The question is whether she knows why. He thought about the woman in his kitchen, tears streaming down her face as she scrubbed dishes that weren't her responsibility, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she'd flinched when he'd moved closer. Either she was an exceptional actress or she was genuinely terrified. There's more, Marcus continued. Her father's case was never officially closed. The stolen files were never recovered, and there were always questions about whether his death was really suicide. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests someone wanted him dead before he could talk. Proserpio's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at the screen and saw a number he didn't recognize. Your cook is more valuable than you know. We'll be in touch. He showed the message to Marcus, whose expression darkened immediately. How did they get this number? Marcus asked. The same way they got Vera Gebhart into my kitchen, Proserpio replied, his voice deadly calm. Someone on the inside helped them. Marcus was already moving, his fingers flying across the tablet as he initiated security protocols. I'll start with the hiring process. Someone had to approve her application, process her background check. Do it. Quietly, Proserpio said. If there's a leak in our organization, I want to know who it is before they realize we're looking. He walked back to the window, his mind racing through possibilities. If Vera was Vera Gebhart's daughter, then someone had spent 15 years positioning her for this moment. But why now? What had changed? His reflection stared back at him from the glass, and he thought about the way she'd looked at him in the kitchen, not with the calculated seduction he was used to from women who wanted something, but with genuine fear. Fear of him, yes, but also fear of something else. Something deeper. Marcus, he said without turning around. Yes, boss? If they wanted her here, they didn't want her to survive it. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Somewhere in his organization, someone was playing a game that involved an innocent woman and secrets buried 15 years deep. Proserpio Ferri had built his empire on the principle that betrayal was met with swift and final justice. But this betrayal was different. This one had a face, and that face belonged to a woman who cried while washing dishes at midnight. The game had begun, and the stakes were higher than anyone realized. Things are already getting darker. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and tell us your country or city in the comments. The industrial mixer hummed its familiar rhythm as I kneaded pasta dough, the repetitive motion offering a brief respite from the anxiety that had plagued me since my encounter with Proserpio 3 days ago. The kitchen staff moved around me with practiced efficiency, preparing for another evening service, but I could feel their sideways glances like pinpricks against my skin. Heard the boss came down to the kitchen the other night, Sophia, the sous chef, said as she julienned vegetables with mechanical precision. Her tone was casual, but I caught the underlying curiosity. In Proserpio's world, information was currency, and everyone was always listening. He was just checking on things, I replied, keeping my voice steady as I rolled the dough through the pasta machine, making sure everything was running smoothly. Funny, Sophia continued, her knife never pausing. He's never checked on the kitchen before, not once in the 5 years I've worked here. The other cooks had gone quiet, their attention focused on their tasks, but their ears tuned to our conversation. I could feel the weight of their speculation, the dangerous curiosity that came with working for a man like Proserpio Ferri. Maybe he couldn't sleep, I said, forcing a lightness into my voice that I didn't feel. You know how it is with insomnia. Sophia's laugh was sharp. The boss doesn't have trouble sleeping, Vera. He gives other people trouble sleeping. The pasta dough tore in my hands, and I had to start over, my fingers trembling slightly as I reformed the ball. 3 days of this, whispered. Conversations that stopped when I entered a room, meaningful looks exchanged over my head, the constant sensation of being watched and evaluated. But it wasn't just the staff. I'd noticed other things, too. The way certain security guards seemed to appear wherever I went. The maintenance worker who'd been fixing the same light fixture outside my quarters for 2 days straight. The feeling that every move I made was being cataloged and analyzed. Vera. The voice belonged to Mrs. Chen, the head of household staff, and it cut through the kitchen chatter like a blade. Mr. Ferri wants to see you in his office. Now. The pasta machine clattered to a stop. Every conversation in the kitchen died, and I could feel a dozen pairs of eyes watching my reaction. My mouth went dry, but I managed to nod and untie my apron with hands that only shook slightly. Should I finish the pasta first? I asked, grasping for any delay. Now, Mrs. Chen repeated, her expression unreadable. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to my own execution. I'd never been to Proserpio's office, had only heard whispered descriptions from other staff members who spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones. The doors opened to reveal a reception area where a severe-looking woman sat behind a glass desk, her fingers clicking across a keyboard with military precision. "Vera Gebhart," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, her gaze sharp and assessing. "He's waiting for you." The office doors were solid mahogany, and they opened silently at my approach. Proserpio stood with his back to me, silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Manhattan. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like armor, and even from behind, his presence filled the room with an almost tangible sense of power. "Close the door," he said without turning around. I did as instructed, the soft click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. The office was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive, intimidating, designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Dark wood, leather furniture, and artwork that probably cost more than most people made in a year. "Do you know why you're here, Vera?" he asked, finally turning to face me. "No, sir." He studied my face for a long moment, those dark eyes seeming to peer directly into my soul. "Someone left this for you at the service entrance this morning." He held up a small white envelope, my name written across it in block letters. My blood turned to ice. No one knew I worked here. No one from my old life had any way of finding me. "I haven't opened it," he continued, walking around his desk to stand directly in front of me. "But I'm curious about who might be sending you mail at my address." With trembling fingers, I took the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a single piece of paper with a message that made my knees nearly buckle. "Your father didn't kill himself, and if Proserpio finds what he left behind, you won't survive it." The paper fluttered to the floor as my hands went numb. The room seemed to tilt around me, and I had to grip the back of a chair to keep from falling. 15 years of believing my father had abandoned me, had chosen death over fighting for us, and now, Vera. Proserpio's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Look at me." I raised my eyes to his and saw something I hadn't expected. Not anger or suspicion, but a kind of calculating concern. "Who knows you're here?" he asked. "No one," I whispered. "I don't have anyone left." "Everyone has someone, family, friends, former colleagues. My father is dead. I have no other family. I haven't spoken to anyone from my old life since I came here." The words tumbled out in a rush, desperation making me honest. "I don't know who sent this. I don't know what it means." He picked up the paper from the floor, reading the message again. "Your father's name was Matthias Gebhart." It wasn't a question, and the certainty in his voice made my stomach drop. "How do you— He worked for me once, a long time ago." The room spun around me. "That's impossible. My father was an accountant. He worked for a small firm in Chicago. He worked for several firms, Proserpio said, his voice gentle but implacable, including mine. I sank into the chair, my legs no longer able to support me. You knew him. I knew him, and I know why someone wants you close to me. The implications crashed over me like a wave. Everything I'd believed about my father, about my life, about how I'd ended up here, all of it was a lie. I wasn't just a cook who'd stumbled into a job with a dangerous man. I was a pawn in a game I didn't understand, positioned by players I couldn't see. Am I going to die? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Proserpio was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with those penetrating dark eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made my breath catch. Not if I can help it, but Vera. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. You're still here because I haven't decided what you are yet. But after this, he gestured to the paper, I think I'm beginning to understand. Would you survive in a house like this? Subscribe now to stay with the story, and let us know where you're watching from below. The next 3 days passed in a haze of paranoia and sleepless nights. Every shadow in the hallway seemed to hide a threat. Every unexpected sound made my heart race. I moved through my kitchen duties like a ghost, mechanically preparing meals while my mind churned through the impossible revelation that my father had worked for Proserpio Ferri. The other staff had noticed my distraction. Sophia's concerned glances, Mrs. Chen's sharp observations, the way conversations died when I entered a room, it all added to the suffocating weight of secrets I couldn't share. But it was the security presence that truly unnerved me. The guards who appeared wherever I went, the cameras that seemed to track my every movement, the sense that I was being protected and imprisoned simultaneously. I was arranging fresh herbs in the walk-in cooler when I found it. Another envelope, this one tucked behind a case of wine where only someone with intimate knowledge of the kitchen's layout would think to look. My name was written in the same block letters, but this time my hands shook so violently I could barely tear it open. The message inside was longer, more detailed, and infinitely more terrifying. Your father stole more than money from the Ferri family. He took insurance, files that could destroy 3 crime families, including Proserpio's. He hid them before he died, and someone thinks you know where. You have 48 hours to find what he left behind, or Proserpio will realize you're more dangerous alive than dead. The storage unit key is taped under your bed. Unit 247, Queen Self-Storage. Go alone, or you'll never leave that building alive. The paper crumpled in my fist as I slumped against the cold metal shelving. My father hadn't just worked for Proserpio, he'd betrayed him, stolen from him. And now, 15 years later, I was paying the price for sins I'd never known existed. The storage unit key. I thought of my small quarters, the narrow bed where I'd spent countless sleepless nights. Had it been there all along, waiting? Had someone placed it recently? The questions multiplied like cancer cells, each one more terrifying than the last. I stumbled out of the cooler, the envelope clutched against my chest, and nearly collided with Marcus Chen. Proserpio's head of security stood in the kitchen doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. Miss Gebhart, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Mr. Ferri would like to see you. Now? The word came out as a croak. Now. The elevator ride felt like a descent into hell. Marcus stood beside me, silent and imposing, while I tried to control the trembling that had taken over my entire body. The envelope felt like it was burning through my shirt, the words seared into my memory. 48 hours. The countdown had already begun. Proserpio's office was darker this time, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the expensive furniture. He stood behind his desk, his hands flat on the mahogany surface, his dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my knees weak. You found another message, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Show me. With trembling fingers, I pulled the envelope from my shirt and placed it on his desk. He read it slowly, his expression growing darker with each word. When he finished, he looked up at me with something that might have been pity. "Vera," he said softly, "sit down." I collapsed into the chair across from his desk, my legs finally giving out completely. "I don't know where any files are," I whispered. "I was 11 when he died. I don't know anything about storage units or insurance or—" "I know," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "But someone thinks you do, and that makes you valuable to them and dangerous to me." The words hit me like physical blows. "Are you going to kill me?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with those penetrating eyes. "That depends on what we find in that storage unit." "We?" "You're not going alone, Vera. If this is a trap, and it probably is, I'm not sending you to die without backup." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a new terror. But the message said a lot of things, most of them lies designed to manipulate you. He came around the desk and leaned against it, his arms crossed. "Whoever is playing this game has been planning it for 15 years. They've positioned you perfectly, close enough to me to be valuable, isolated enough to be controllable. But they made one mistake." "What?" "They assumed I'd react predictably, that I'd see you as a threat and eliminate you immediately." His dark eyes met mine. "Instead, I'm curious about what your father really stole and why someone wants it badly enough to use his daughter as bait." I thought about the storage unit key, supposedly hidden under my bed, about the files that could destroy crime families, about the father I'd thought I knew who'd apparently lived a double life. What if I can't find whatever they're looking for? "Then we'll know this was never about the files," Proserpio said. "It was about getting you close to me for some other reason." "What other reason?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "Your father didn't just steal files, Vera. He stole something else, something more personal." "What?" "Trust." The word hung in the air between us like a blade. "He worked for my family for 3 years. He ate at our table, knew our secrets, understood our vulnerabilities, and then he betrayed us." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. "I'm not my father." "No," he agreed, "but you're his daughter, and in my world the sins of the father often fall on the children." The injustice of it crashed over me like a wave. 15 years of believing I was an orphan, of struggling through foster care and culinary school and minimum wage jobs, all while carrying the weight of a betrayal I'd never known existed. "I never asked for any of this," I whispered. "I know." He moved closer, his presence both comforting and terrifying. "But you're in it now, whether you asked for it or not. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I looked up at him, this dangerous man who held my life in his hands, and felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else, a spark of the defiance that had carried me through years of uncertainty. "I want to know the truth," I said, "about my father, about the files, about why someone thinks I'm worth 15 years of planning." Something flickered in his dark eyes, approval perhaps, or recognition. "Then we'll find it together. But Vera," his voice dropped to a whisper, "once we open that door, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready for what we might find?" I thought about the message, about the countdown that was already ticking away, about the father whose memory had been poisoned by secrets and lies. "I'm ready," I said, and for the first time in days, I meant it. The truth is starting to crack open. Tap subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, and comment your location. Let us see how global the story is. The storage facility in Queens looked like a fortress of corrugated metal and concrete, its rows of identical units stretching into the gray afternoon light. I sat in the passenger seat of Proserpio's black SUV, watching his security team position themselves around the perimeter with military precision. Marcus spoke quietly into his earpiece, coordinating movements I couldn't see but could feel in the tension that filled the air. Unit 247 is in the back corner, Marcus reported, lowering his phone. Isolated, good sight lines, but also perfect for an ambush. Proserpio's jaw tightened. How long has the unit been rented? That's the interesting part, Marcus said, consulting his tablet. It was paid for in advance 15 years ago. Cash payment for a 20-year lease under the name M. Gebhart. My breath caught. My father rented it before he died? Or someone wanted us to think he did, Proserpio replied, his dark eyes scanning the facility. The timing is too convenient. He dies, you disappear into foster care, and 15 years later you show up in my kitchen just as someone starts sending messages about this storage unit. The key felt heavy in my palm, a small piece of metal that had indeed been taped under my bed, exactly where the message had promised. Finding it there had been almost worse than not finding it at all, because it meant someone had been in my room, close enough to touch my belongings while I slept. Boss. Marcus's voice carried a note of urgency. We've got movement. 2 vehicles just pulled into the parking lot. Through the tinted windows, I could see a black sedan and a white van positioning themselves near the facility's entrance. The occupants remained inside, but their presence sent ice through my veins. They're watching, I whispered. They're waiting, Proserpio corrected. The question is for what? His phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. Unknown number. Answer it, Marcus advised, but keep them talking. Proserpio accepted the call and put it on speaker. You have something to say? The voice that came through was electronically distorted, robotic and cold. Mr. Ferri, I trust you found our message informative. I found it amateur, Proserpio replied, his tone bored. If you want to negotiate, do it properly. This isn't a negotiation. It's a recovery operation. The girl has something that belongs to us. The girl has a name, and she doesn't have anything except what you've planted on her. A pause. You're more perceptive than we anticipated. I'm more perceptive than you deserve. Who are you working for? People who remember Matthias Gebhart's betrayal. People who've waited 15 years for justice. I felt Proserpio's eyes on me, but I couldn't look away from the phone. The voice was talking about my father like he was a criminal, a traitor, but all I could remember was a quiet man who made me pancakes on Sunday mornings and read me bedtime stories. Justice, Proserpio repeated. Is that what you call using his daughter as bait? We call it poetic. Matthias stole our future. Now his daughter will help us reclaim it. And if she can't? The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then she'll share his fate. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hands shaking as the implications sank in. These people, whoever they were, had been planning this for 15 years. They'd waited for me to grow up, to become useful, and then they'd maneuvered me into Proserpio's orbit like a chess piece. Boss, Marcus said urgently, the vehicles are moving. Through the windows, I watched the sedan and van begin a slow circuit of the facility. They weren't approaching directly, but they were closing the distance, tightening the noose. We need to move, Proserpio said. If there's something in that storage unit, we get it before they do. And if it's a trap, then we spring it on our terms. The next few minutes passed in a blur of coordinated movement. Marcus's team created a perimeter while Proserpio and I approached Unit 247 on foot. The key turned easily in the lock, as if it had been recently maintained, and the metal door rolled up with barely a whisper. Inside, the unit was larger than I'd expected, filled with cardboard boxes and covered furniture. But it was the wall of photographs that made me gasp. Dozens of pictures of me throughout my childhood and teenage years. School photos, candid shots taken from a distance, images I'd never known existed. They've been watching you your entire life, Proserpio said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I moved deeper into the unit, my eyes scanning the boxes for anything that might contain the files everyone seemed so desperate to find. But it was a manila envelope taped to the back wall that caught my attention, my name written across it in my father's familiar handwriting. Inside were documents I didn't understand, financial records, transaction logs, names and dates that meant nothing to me. But there was also a letter, written in my father's careful script. My dearest Vera, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I'm no longer there to protect you. I've made terrible mistakes, trusted the wrong people, and now I fear those. Mistakes will follow you long after I'm gone. The files in this envelope contain evidence of money laundering, murder, and corruption that reaches into the highest levels of organized crime. I took them as insurance, hoping to buy us a new life far from the violence I'd become part of. But insurance only works if you're alive to use it. I've hidden the real files somewhere safe, somewhere only you would think to look. Remember the place where we used to watch the stars, where I taught you to make wishes on satellites? The answer is there, waiting for you to be old enough to understand. Trust no one completely, but if you must trust someone, choose carefully. Not everyone who claims to protect you has your best interests at heart. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Papa. My hands shook as I finished reading. The place where we watch stars, I knew exactly where he meant. The roof of our old apartment building, where he'd taken me on clear nights to point out constellations and tell me stories about brave princesses and distant worlds. Vera. Proserpio's voice was urgent. We need to go. Now. I looked up to see him standing at the unit's entrance, his phone pressed to his ear. Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker. Boss, we've got company, multiple vehicles converging on our position. The files aren't here, I said, clutching my father's letter. He hid them somewhere else. Where? Chicago. Our old apartment building. Proserpio's eyes met mine, and I saw the calculation there, the weighing of risks and benefits. Then that's where we're going. But the people watching us will follow us there, which means we'll finally know who we're dealing with. He took my arm, guiding me toward the exit. Your father was right about one thing, Vera. Trust is a luxury neither of us can afford. As we ran toward the SUV, gunfire erupted behind us. The trap had been sprung, but not the way anyone had planned. At this point, do you still trust him? Don't forget to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The private dining room beneath Torino's restaurant felt like a tomb, windowless, soundproof, and thick with the weight of old grudges. Proserpio sat at the head of the mahogany table, his hands folded calmly in front of him, while 5 other men arranged themselves around the polished surface like pieces on a chessboard. The air reeked of expensive cigars and barely contained violence. I waited in the adjacent room, watching through a one-way mirror that Marcus had positioned me behind. My father's letter was safely locked in Proserpio's office safe, but the knowledge it contained burned in my mind like acid. The real files were still out there, hidden in a place that would require a trip to Chicago to retrieve, a trip that these men would never allow. Proserpio, said Vincent Torino, the restaurant owner whose establishment served as neutral ground for meetings. Like this. He was a thin man with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. We appreciate you coming. I appreciate being summoned like a dog, Proserpio replied, his voice carrying just enough edge to make the other men shift uncomfortably. What's so urgent that it couldn't wait for a proper council meeting? Anthony Marcelli, head of the Marcelli family, leaned forward. He was younger than the others, maybe 40, with the kind of aggressive energy that came from having something to prove. We hear you're harboring a strategic asset, something that belongs to all of us. I'm harboring a cook, Proserpio said, unless you're concerned about the quality of my dinner parties. Don't play games, snapped Roberto Santangelo, whose family controlled the docks. We know who she is, Matthias Gebhart's daughter. We know what her father stole." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Proserpio's expression didn't change, but I could see the subtle shift in his posture, the way his shoulders squared for battle. "Matthias Gebhart has been dead for 15 years, he said. "Whatever he stole died with him." "Did it?" Marcelli pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. "Because someone's been very busy lately. Storage units, encrypted messages, coordinated surveillance. Someone thinks those files still exist." Proserpio glanced at the tablet without touching it. "And you think I'm behind it?" "We think you're protecting the one person who might know where they are," Santangelo said, "which makes you either very smart or very stupid." "I'm protecting my cook," Proserpio replied, "who makes excellent ossobuco and has never shown any interest in 15-year-old financial records." Torino cleared his throat. "Proserpio, we've been allies for a long time. But this situation threatens all of us. Those files contain information that could bring down 3 families. We can't afford to let sentiment cloud our judgment." "Sentiment?" Proserpio's voice was deadly quiet. "Is that what you think this is?" "We think you've grown attached to a pretty face," Marcelli said with a smirk. "It happens to the best of us, but business is business." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Proserpio stood slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Let me be very clear about something," he said. "Vera Gebhart is under my protection. She lives in my building, works in my kitchen, and sleeps under my roof, which means anyone who touches her declares war on me personally." Marcelli laughed, but it sounded forced. "One woman isn't worth a war, Proserpio." "This woman is." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I pressed my hand against the glass, my heart racing as I watched the other men exchange glances. They'd expected negotiation, compromise, perhaps even a business arrangement. They hadn't expected a declaration of war. "You're making a mistake," Santangelo said. "She's not worth protecting." "That's not your decision to make." Torino tried to play peacemaker. "Perhaps we can reach an accommodation. The girl could be questioned gently to determine what she knows. If she's truly innocent—" "She is innocent." Proserpio's voice cut through the suggestion like a blade. "And she's not available for questioning." "Then you're choosing her over 20 years of alliance," Marcelli said, standing as well, "over business relationships that have made us all rich." "I'm choosing principle over profit," Proserpio replied, "something you might want to consider." The meeting was deteriorating rapidly. I could see it in the way the men's hands moved closer to their jackets, in the subtle positioning that suggested violence was only moments away. But it was Torino's next words that changed everything. "What if we told you she's not who you think she is?" he said quietly. Proserpio went very still. "Explain." "The girl you're protecting, she didn't just stumble into your employment. She was placed there, carefully, deliberately, by people who've been planning this for years." "I know that." "Do you know who placed her?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. I found myself holding my breath, waiting for an answer I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. "Someone with access to my hiring process," Proserpio said. "Someone inside my organization." "Someone in this room," Torino corrected. The accusation exploded through the space like a grenade. Every man at the table was suddenly a suspect, every alliance called into question. I watched Proserpio's face, saw the moment when suspicion crystallized into certainty. "Which one of you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" Marcelli said. "The point is, she's been a weapon aimed at your heart from the beginning. Everything she's told you, everything you think you know about her, it's all been carefully orchestrated." "By whom?" "By people who remember what Matthias Gebhart cost us," Santangelo said. "By people who want justice for 15 years of looking over our shoulders." Proserpio was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes moving from face to face around the table. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the finality of a death sentence. "You want her," he said. "Come and take her." He turned and walked toward the door, his movement triggering a flurry of activity from the other men. Chairs scraped against the floor, hands moved toward weapons, and the careful civility of the meeting shattered like glass. "This isn't over, Proserpio," Martelli called after him. Proserpio paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "No," he agreed. "It's just beginning." As he left the room, I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. Not anger or determination, but calculation. He was planning something, and I had the terrible feeling that I was going to be at the center of it. The war had been declared, and I was the prize they were fighting over. This just turned into war. If you're still watching, you're a real one. Subscribe now and tell us where you're streaming from. The power died at exactly 11:47 p.m. I was in the kitchen, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that had become my constant companion since the underground meeting 3 days ago. The sudden plunge into darkness was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment I thought I'd gone blind. Then the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that made the familiar space feel alien and threatening. My first instinct was to reach for my phone, but the screen remained black, dead, like everything else electronic in the building. The silence was wrong too, missing the constant hum of refrigeration units, ventilation systems, and the dozen other machines that kept Proserpio's penthouse functioning. This wasn't a power outage. This was an attack. I moved toward the service elevator, my bare feet silent on the cold tile, but the doors wouldn't respond to my touch. The stairwell then. But as I reached for the handle, I heard it. The soft whisper of the service elevator moving, its emergency power allowing it to function while everything else remained dead. Someone was coming up. Panic flooded my system as I realized how exposed I was. The kitchen's floor-to-ceiling windows made me visible to anyone with night vision equipment, and the emergency lighting turned me into a perfect target. I needed to hide. But where? The walk-in cooler would trap me, the pantry had no exit, and the elevator chimed softly as it reached my floor. I grabbed the largest knife from the magnetic strip and pressed myself against the wall beside the kitchen entrance, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure it would give me away. The blade felt foreign in my hands. I'd spent years learning to create with knives, not destroy. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with the careful precision of professionals. They knew the layout, knew exactly where they were going. The beam of a tactical flashlight swept across the kitchen, and I held my breath as it passed inches from my hiding spot. "Target's not in her quarters," a voice whispered. Male, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "Check the common areas." "Kitchen's clear," another voice reported. But it wasn't clear. I was right here, pressed against the wall like a shadow, clutching a knife I wasn't sure I could use. The footsteps moved away, heading toward the living areas, and I knew I had maybe 30 seconds before they realized their mistake and came back. I needed to move. But where? The stairwell was too far, the elevator was compromised, and the windows were 42 stories above the street. I was trapped in a glass box with nowhere to run. That's when I remembered the dumbwaiter. It was an old-fashioned service lift that connected the kitchen to Proserpio's private dining room 1 floor up, a relic from when the building had been designed for a different kind of entertaining. I'd noticed it during my first week, but had never seen it used. Now it might be my only escape route. I crept across the kitchen, staying low and moving between the islands to avoid the windows. The dumbwaiter was hidden behind a panel that looked like part of the cabinetry, and my fingers fumbled with the latch as footsteps returned to the kitchen. "She's here somewhere," the first voice said. "Building's locked down tight. No way out." The panel opened silently, revealing a space barely large enough for a person. I squeezed inside, pulling the knife with me, and eased the door closed just as flashlight beams swept across the kitchen again. The dumbwaiter's manual pulley system was ancient but functional. I pulled myself up slowly, trying not to make any noise as the ropes creaked under my weight. Below me, I could hear the intruders moving through the kitchen with increasing urgency. "Boss wants her alive," one of them said, "but if she runs, all bets are off." "She's not running, she's hiding." The dumbwaiter opened into Proserpio's private dining room, a space I'd only seen from a distance. I climbed out carefully, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, and tried to orient myself in the darkness. The emergency lighting here was dimmer, casting everything in deep shadows. I needed to find Proserpio. If his security team was compromised, if someone had gotten close enough to cut the power and infiltrate the building, then he was in as much danger as I was, maybe more. A sound from the kitchen below made me freeze, the dumbwaiter moving. They'd found my escape route. I had maybe a minute before they reached this floor. I ran. The hallway stretched ahead of me like a tunnel, lined with doors I'd never seen opened. Proserpio's private quarters were at the far end, but the distance seemed impossible to cover before my pursuers arrived. My bare feet slapped against the floor, despite my efforts to stay quiet, and I could hear the dumbwaiter reaching the dining room behind me. "She's on 43, a voice called out, no longer bothering with whispers. I reached Proserpio's door and pounded on it with my fist, the knife still clutched in my other hand. "Proserpio! They're here! They're—" The door opened so suddenly I nearly fell forward. Strong hands caught me, pulling me inside, and I found myself pressed against Proserpio's chest in the darkness. He was fully dressed despite the late hour, and I could feel the weight of a gun in his shoulder holster. "How many?" he asked, his voice calm despite the chaos. "At least 3. They came up through the service elevator, the power." "I know about the power." He guided me away from the door, his hands steady on my shoulders. "Marcus is dealing with it." "Your security team is fine. This was expected." I stared at him in the dim emergency lighting, trying to process what he'd just said. "Expected?" "We knew they'd try something like this. The meeting was designed to force their hand. You used me as bait." "I used you as bait," he confirmed, and there was no apology in his voice. "But I also made sure you'd survive it." The sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere in the building, sharp, controlled bursts that spoke of professional engagement. Proserpio's expression didn't change, but his hand moved to his weapon. "Stay here," he said. "Don't open this door for anyone but me or Marcus." "Where are you going?" "To end this." He moved toward the door, but I caught his arm. "Proserpio, wait. The files. I know where they are. My father hid them on the roof of our old apartment building in Chicago. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you." His dark eyes met mine, and I saw something there I hadn't expected. Not just determination, but something deeper. "I told you before, Vera. You're under my protection." "How long before they try again?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "They won't." "How can you be sure?" His smile was cold and predatory. "Because I'm going to them." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in the darkness with the sound of gunfire echoing through the building and the terrible certainty that everything was about to change. Things just got deadly. Hit that subscribe button before the next chapter, and comment your location so we can shout you out. The gunfire had stopped an hour ago, but I could still hear its echo in the silence that followed. I sat in Proserpio's private study, wrapped in one of his shirts that smelled like expensive cologne and danger, watching the city lights flicker beyond the bulletproof windows. Marcus had given me the all-clear 20 minutes earlier. 3 intruders dead, no casualties among Proserpio's team, but my hand still shook when I reached for the cup of coffee growing cold on the side table. The door opened without a knock, and Proserpio entered carrying a manila folder thick with documents. His white shirt was stained with something dark, and there was a cut along his jaw that he hadn't bothered to clean. He looked like a man who'd just fought a war and won. "It's over," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "For now." Who were they? Freelancers, hired muscle with no loyalty to anyone except their bank accounts. He opened the folder and spread several photographs across the coffee table between us, but they were carrying these. The photos were surveillance shots, me entering the storage facility, me in the kitchen, me walking through the building's lobby. But it was the older pictures that made my breath catch. Images of my father from 15 years ago, meeting with men I didn't recognize in locations that looked like restaurants and office buildings. "Your father wasn't just an accountant, Vera," Proserpio said quietly. "He was a financial architect. He designed money laundering operations for 3 crime families, including mine." I stared at the photographs, trying to reconcile the man in the images with the father I remembered. That's impossible. He worked for a small firm. He did taxes and bookkeeping. He did that too. It was perfect cover. Proserpio pulled out another document, a bank statement with numbers that made my eyes widen. Matthias Gebhart moved over $50 million through legitimate businesses in the 3 years he worked for us. He was brilliant at it. Then why did he steal from you? Because he got scared. Proserpio leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes studying my face. "The FBI was closing in on one of our operations. Your father knew it was only a matter of time before they connected him to the money laundering, so he took out insurance. The files. Not just files. Complete financial records, transaction logs, communication intercepts, witness statements. Everything needed to bring down the Ferri, Marcelli, and Santangelo families." He pulled out a thick stack of papers. "We found copies of some of it tonight. Your father was thorough." I picked up one of the documents, scanning the dense financial data that meant nothing to me. If he had all this, why didn't he use it? Why didn't he make a deal with the FBI? "Because he loved you more than he feared prison." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked up from the papers to find Proserpio watching me with something that might have been sympathy. "I don't understand." The FBI offered him witness protection in exchange for testimony, new identities, relocation, complete severance from his old life. But there was a catch. He'd have to disappear immediately. No contact with family, no goodbyes, no explanation. You would have woken up one morning to find your father gone forever. Tears burned behind my eyes. So he chose to die instead. He chose to try a different way. He planned to take the files and run, start over somewhere the families couldn't find you. But someone betrayed him before he could execute the plan. Who? Proserpio was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the arm of his chair. Someone who knew about the files, knew about his escape plan, and knew exactly when and where to find him. Someone in your organization. Someone in one of the 3 families. Yes, we never found out who. He leaned forward, his expression intense. But tonight's attack wasn't random, Vera. Someone's been planning this for 15 years, waiting for you to grow up, waiting for the right moment to use you. I thought about the storage unit, the photographs of me throughout my childhood, the careful manipulation that had led me to Proserpio's kitchen. They've been watching me my entire life. Not watching, grooming, making sure you developed the skills they'd need, making sure you ended up in the right place at the right time. The culinary school, the restaurant jobs, all of it. Someone made sure you became exactly what I'd be looking for in a cook. Someone who knew my preferences, my security requirements, my hiring process. The implications crashed over me like a wave. Everything I'd thought was my choice, my path, my life. All of it had been orchestrated by people I'd never met for reasons I was only beginning to understand. But why? I asked. If they wanted the files, why not just take them? Why involve me at all? Because your father was smarter than they gave him credit for. Proserpio pulled out a final document, a letter written in my father's careful handwriting. He didn't just hide the files, he encrypted them, and the encryption key is something only you would know. I took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing my father's writing immediately. The stars remember what we forget. The constellation we named together holds the key to everything. Count the points of light in our special pattern, and you'll find the numbers that unlock the truth. A constellation, I whispered. He's talking about the constellation we made up together. We used to lie on the roof and connect random stars into our own patterns. Do you remember it? I closed my eyes, trying to recall those nights on the roof of our Chicago apartment building, my father pointing at the sky, helping me trace lines between stars that had no official connection. Vera's crown, I said softly. We called it Vera's crown, 7 stars arranged in a circle. 7 numbers for the encryption key. But I don't remember the exact stars. It was 15 years ago, and I was just a child. Then we'll have to go to Chicago, Proserpio said, to the roof where you made those memories. I looked at him, this dangerous man who'd just declared war on 3 crime families to protect me. Why are you doing this? Why risk everything for someone you barely know? He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes distant. Because your father saved my life once. Before he betrayed us, before everything went wrong, he warned me about an FBI raid that would have put me in prison for the rest of my life. He saved you, and then he betrayed me. But the debt remains. He stood, moving to the window to stare out at the city. Besides, I don't like being manipulated. Someone's been playing a 15-year game using you as a pawn. I intend to find out who. I joined him at the window, the city sprawling below us like a circuit board of light and shadow. What happens when we find the files? That depends on what's in them, he said, and what you decide to do with the truth. The weight of 15 years of secrets pressed down on me like a physical force. Somewhere in Chicago, on a rooftop where a little girl had once made wishes on satellites, lay the answers to questions I'd never known to ask. The truth is, finally, pouring out. If you want to see how this ends, subscribe now and let us know where you're watching from. The rooftop of my childhood apartment building looked smaller than I remembered, its tar-covered surface cracked and weathered by 15 years of Chicago winters. The city sprawled around us in the pre-dawn darkness, a maze of lights and shadows that seemed to pulse with hidden dangers. Proserpio stood beside me, his presence both protective and predatory, as we stared up at the star-scattered sky. There, I whispered, pointing to a cluster of stars above the eastern horizon. Vera's crown. The constellation was exactly as I remembered it. 7 stars arranged in an irregular circle, connected by lines only my father and I had ever seen. I counted them carefully, translating their positions into the numbers that would unlock 15 years of buried secrets. 7-3-9-1-5-8-2. Marcus worked quietly behind us, his laptop connected to a satellite uplink that would allow us to access the encrypted files remotely. The real storage location had been hidden in my father's final letter, not a physical place, but a digital vault accessible only with the right key. Got it, Marcus announced. The encryption's breaking now. I turned away from the stars to watch the screen fill with documents, photographs, and audio files. 15 years of evidence that could destroy 3 crime families, all hidden behind a code only a little girl and her father had known. Jesus, Marcus breathed, scrolling through the data. This isn't just money laundering. There are murder contracts, witness eliminations, judicial bribes, everything. Proserpio moved to look over Marcus's shoulder, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Your father documented everything, he said to me. Every crime, every conspiracy, every dirty deal. Including yours? I asked. Especially mine. He met my eyes, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not shame, but acceptance. "I won't lie to you, Vera. What's in those files could put me away for life." The weight of that admission settled between us like a loaded gun. I held the power to destroy the man who'd protected me, who'd declared war on his own allies to keep me safe. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father had died trying to escape this world, and now I stood at its center, holding the keys to its destruction. "Boss," Marcus said urgently, "we've got company." 3 black SUVs had pulled up to the building's entrance, their occupants moving with military precision as they secured the perimeter. Through the stairwell door, I could hear footsteps echoing up the concrete steps, multiple sets moving fast. "Marcelli," Proserpio said, recognizing the tactical formation. "He must have been tracking us." "How long do we have?" I asked. "Maybe 2 minutes before they reach the roof." Marcus was already packing up his equipment, the laptop containing the files secured in a reinforced case. "We can extract via the fire escape, but it'll be tight." "No." The word came out stronger than I'd intended, surprising all of us. "I'm tired of running." Proserpio turned to face me fully. "Vera, this isn't the time for heroics. Those men will kill you without hesitation." "Then let them try." I moved to the center of the rooftop, positioning myself where I'd be visible to anyone coming through the stairwell door. "I want to face them." "You want to die?" "I want to choose." The words carried 15 years of frustration, of being manipulated and positioned and used by people who saw me as nothing more than a tool. For once in my life, I want to make my own decision about what happens next. The stairwell door burst open, and Anthony Marcelli emerged with 4 armed men. He looked older than he had in the underground meeting, his face drawn with exhaustion and desperation. Behind him came Roberto Santangelo and Vincent Torino, the 3 family heads united in their determination to claim the files. "Miss Gebhart," Marcelli called out, his voice carrying across the rooftop, "you have something that belongs to us." "I have something that belonged to my father," I replied, "and he's dead because of you." "Your father was a thief and a traitor," Santangelo spat. "He got what he deserved. He got murdered by people he trusted." I felt Proserpio tense beside me, ready to move, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Just like you're planning to murder me." Torino stepped forward, his expression almost paternal. "It doesn't have to end that way, child. Give us the files and you can walk away from this. New identity, new life, enough money to disappear forever." Like my father was supposed to disappear. Your father made his choice. Now you have to make yours. I looked at the 3 men who'd shaped my life from the shadows, who'd turned me into a weapon aimed at the heart of the man standing beside me. Then I looked at Proserpio, this dangerous, complicated man who'd chosen to protect me despite knowing it could destroy him. "I've made my choice," I said. I pulled out the laptop case Marcus had given me and held it over the edge of the building. 42 stories below, the street waited like an open mouth. "The files are encrypted," I continued. "Only I know the key. Kill me and they're lost forever." "You're bluffing," Marcelli said, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Am I?" I let the case slip slightly in my grip. "My father died protecting these secrets. What makes you think I won't do the same?" The standoff stretched between us, tension crackling like electricity in the pre-dawn air. I could see the calculation in their eyes, the weighing of risks and benefits that defined their world. "What do you want?" Torino asked finally. "I want the truth about who killed my father. I want the name of the person who betrayed him." The 3 men exchanged glances, and I saw the answer in their silence. "It was you," I said to Torino. "You were the inside man." His expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Your father was going to bring us all down. Someone had to stop him. Someone had to murder him. Someone had to protect the families." I felt something shift inside me, a cold clarity that cut through 15 years of grief and confusion. Then you can protect them from this. I opened the laptop case and pulled out a small device. Not the computer, but a wireless transmitter Marcus had prepared. With a single button press, I uploaded every file, every document, every piece of evidence to a dozen news outlets simultaneously. "What have you done?" Marcelli screamed. "What my father should have done 15 years ago," I replied. I chose justice over survival. The chaos that followed was swift and brutal. Gunfire erupted across the rooftop as Proserpio's backup team, positioned in the surrounding buildings, engaged Marcelli's men. I found myself pulled behind an air conditioning unit, Proserpio's body shielding mine as bullets sparked off metal and concrete. When the shooting stopped, 3 of the most powerful crime bosses in the city lay dead on the tar-covered roof, where I'd once made wishes on satellites. "It's over," Proserpio said, helping me to my feet. "Is it?" I looked at him. This man whose crimes were now public knowledge, whose empire would crumble under the weight of the evidence I'd released. "What happens to you now?" He smiled, and for the first time since I'd known him, it reached his eyes. "I suppose I'll have to find a new line of work." "Any ideas?" "I hear there's a good restaurant for sale in Chicago. Might need a partner who knows her way around a kitchen." I stared at him, searching his face for deception, for the calculation that had defined every interaction we'd had. Instead, I found something I'd never expected to see in Proserpio Ferri's eyes: hope. "If I'm going to be hunted," I said, echoing words I'd never thought I'd speak, "I want to stand next to the one who tells the truth about it." As the sun rose over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I chose to be. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more like this and comment where you watched from, because this one traveled far.